Hello and welcome to part one of this two-part series based on arena drafting and then arena gameplay in Hearthstone. What we're going to focus on in this part is just some of the arena draft strategies and different things and reasoning behind picks. So what we're going to do is just kind of a sample draft to go ahead. So I've already went ahead and bought the arena. What we have is our three classes that we can choose from. Between Rogue, widely considered by very good players to be the best, Paladin, very reasonable in Arena with the board control with the hero power, and then the Druid over here with the hero power to also just deal one, much like the Mage. I'm going to go ahead and pick Druid here just for fun, for the sake of it, and because it's one of my more commonly picked classes. Okay, so first pick we see two GVG cards with Recycle and Jeeves, and then the Crazed Alchemist. Not anything too great. When you look at Recycle, it is kind of a hard removal, but to some degree with Arena, Recycle is more or less a 6-mana Assassinate. Crazed Alchemist, not too bad. It can be really good for utility and making some good plays, but Jeeves is typically a very strong pick, as if it gets into later in the game and you can play out your entire hand and play Jeeves and then refill for 3 cards, it can give you a significant advantage. So the plus side and upside of Jeeves is really strong here, so we're going to go with that. Second pick, we see 3 common cards, all Druid. Savage Roar, which is really made for the combo in Constructed. Starfire, a good damage spell with a replacement card. And then the Anodized Robo Cub from GVG. What we're going to do is go with the Robo Cub for now. While Starfire is very strong, we want to get some solid 2-drops, and just having the choose one on it is very strong. Also, worth mentioning here, on going into pick 3, we already have 2 mechs, so we might keep an eye out for a little bit more synergy going forward with mechs. Here we have Innervate, Priestess, and Starfire. Later in the draft, depending on our mana curve, we might go with Innervate if we pick higher cost cards. But here I'd say it's pretty close between Starfire and Innervate, but I think we're going to go with Starfire. Priestess, the stats are just too bad. I mean, you look, a Yeti is a 4/5 for 4, and honestly 4/5 is better than 5/4, and the 4 health to your hero is not worth the extra 2 mana, and really it's costing you like 2.5 mana, so we're going to go with Starfire. Also worth noting on Starfire is drawing a card in addition to dealing the 5 is very powerful. So for this pick we have the Goldshire Footman, Stormpike Commando, and Dread Corsair. Without any weapons in our deck, we're not going to get really any value out of this. It's a 4-mana 3/3 with Taunt. Goldshire Footman is generally terrible, and the Stormpike Commando, while to some degree it's just a significantly worse fire elemental, it has immediate board presence, and that's really useful and effective in Arena. Mark of Nature, Zombie Chow, and Archmage for this pick. Mark of Nature can be very good for trading up, or if you're in a really desperate situation, it can help you taunt a guy to maybe keep you alive another turn. Archmage, a very solid late game card, but Zombie Chow just gives you too much board presence, too much early power, and a turn 1 Zombie Chow, especially against something like a Paladin, can just really help you start to snowball your hand. Mark of the Wild, the Lost Tall Strider, and the Antique Healbot. So here worth mentioning again, the Lost Tall Strider versus the Priestess of Elune from earlier. This is a 5/4, basically doing the exact same thing for 2 less mana, and it's a beast. So just straight better and more proof that Priestess isn't that strong of a card in Arena at all. Antique Healbot can be good for kind of refilling you and giving you the 3/3, and then Mark of the Wild also. So here it's between kind of these outer two. Lost Tall Strider, not terrible either. These are all pretty decent cards that you could see taking. I just think that the Antique Healbot is going to help you a lot more often, and so I'm going to go ahead and go with that. Even though in Arena, a lot of people might not think that Antique Healbot is great, but there is some good use for it. So here we have Wisp, that's terrible. Explosive Sheep, which isn't necessarily great, and then Reckless Rocketeer, which is also not necessarily great. So Wisp is a never pick. Reckless Rocketeer, you're looking at basically 6 mana, deal 5 damage. And then the Explosive Sheep, which can help you if you're behind and hurt you if you're ahead. So it's kind of an interesting pick here, which one you want to go with. I kind of am leaning a little bit more towards the Explosive Sheep, just because it helps you catch up if you're behind, whereas a Reckless Rocketeer is it's only really going to be 5 damage. Maybe it takes out a Taz Dingo or something, you know, that's left up on the board. So again, we see Recycle, Questing Adventurer, and Kezan Mystic. Again, 3 kind of cards that are nothing too terribly special. We have a semi-early curve going right now. The Kezan Mystic can just straight up win games against mages from time to time, but in general, there's not enough secrets, really in Constructed or in Arena, to justify the pick right now. Again, Recycle is just a little bit too expensive for what it's doing. We're going to go with Questing just because our curve, already we have a 1 and then 2 2-drops. This will curve nicely into the 3 and kind of gives us an option to kind of snowball that questing with these early cards. Here we have Junkbot, Echoing Ooze, and Hungry Crab. None of these really great. Hungry Crab, pretty terrible. You can't expect to be able to hit a Murloc. Echoing Ooze can help you. Had we picked Mark of the Wild earlier, Echoing Ooze would be much better. And then the Junkbot is really interesting here because we do have 3 mechs. So this is interesting. So this is really a decision point in our draft. Do we want to go with Echoing Ooze and kind of continue business as usual? Or do we want to go with Junkbot and go thinking maybe we can make a mech deck out of... I mean, we already have 4 mechs in the first 8 picks, too. So this is kind of a pick that's really strange. Normally the pick might be Echoing Ooze, but we're going to go with Junkbot here because of the mech synergy we already have. And keep in mind with that pick of Junkbot that it makes all mechs from here on out a little bit more powerful. Cold Light Seer, Arcane Golem, and Bite here. Arcane Golem is a 3-mana deal 4 for the most part. Cold Light is a Murloc card that has Murloc synergy. Otherwise, it's just way too much for its cost. Arcane is something you're never going to play on 3, and it's kind of hard to find a time to play it. Bite, on the other hand, is just kind of a good all-around removal. Think of it as like a mini fireball for Druid. So we're going to go with Bite, and it also fits the curve just fine, which we don't really need to worry about at this point with just 10 cards. So here we see the Clockwork Gnome, the Micro Machine, and the Druid of the Claws. So as I was saying earlier, the mechs are worth a little bit more with some of this synergy that we have, but Druid of the Claw is just such a good card that I don't think that at this point we can justify picking either of these 2 over the Druid. So here's Undertaker, Elven Archer, and Boulder Fist Ogre. Without being able to build a really strong Hunter deck around Undertaker, we don't want that. We can't rely on anything. I don't even know if we have any Death Rattle so far, just the Explosive Sheep and the Zombie Chow, but we're not going to go ahead and build that just now. And Elven Archer does too little and is too weak of a body versus the Boulder Fist Ogre, which is a really strong late game. So taking a little time out here while we have 12 cards, we see our late game focus is really strong. Already we have a lot of 4s, 5s, and 6s, and not so many 1, 2s, and 3s. So we want more 2s and 3s going forward just with our picks. So we're going to keep that in the back of our mind as we go forward. Explosive Sheep, you don't really want more than 1 Explosive Sheep in your deck. Ideally, you don't even want 1. The Stone Skin Gargoyle is generally just terrible. And then the Frostwolf Warlord is going to be something, especially once we start building our early game, this will help us transition into late really strong and win a lot of games late. Now, that does fill up our 5 slot with 5 cards already, so that's just something to keep in mind. Micro Machine, Naturalize, and Explosive Sheep. Again, Explosive Sheep, not going to win just because we already have one and we don't really want another. Naturalize typically is going to hurt you more than it's going to help you. If you're naturalizing a big minion, unless you're winning the game on that turn, you're really refueling your opponent a little bit too much. And Micro Machine is a great 2-mana card, especially with the synergy we have with Junkbot. So we're going to go Micro Machine. Ship's Cannon, Nomorangan Infantry, and another Frostwolf Warlord. So here we have an interesting pick. We have a lot of late game, and this 5 might make our curve a little bit too high. The 2-mana Ship's Cannon doesn't really do anything for us with its card text, but it is just a 2-mana 2/3, which isn't terrible. Not as good as a 3/2, but not terrible. And then the Infantry is just all around a pretty bad card, regardless of card text. So it's between the Frostwolf and the Ship's Cannon. Based on the fact that we don't have really many 2s, I mean, we really only have the Robo-Cub and the Micro Machine at this point. Explosive Sheep doesn't really count. Fortunately, we do have the Zombie Chow, but we're going to go Ship's Cannon to try to just make our early game a little bit stronger and fill out the curve a little better. Yikes. So here we have an interesting pick. Wisp, which we're never going to take. Mad Scientist, which we're never going to have a secret. And Poison Seeds, which never really works great. So it's interesting in that there's not necessarily a great time to use Poison Seeds. unless we get something like a Star Fall to deal 2 damage to all the minions that we just turned into 2/2s, or they play one really, really terrible, scary minion, and we need to get rid of it. It doesn't leave us with much options, but the Mad Scientist 2 mana 2/2 just isn't good enough. We got to go with Poison Seeds. Nurubar, Weblord, Claw, and Shield Bearer. Shield Bearer is terrible. It just doesn't do enough. It doesn't help you. It's way too situational and generally just bad. It was good in Zoo back during just after the next Rammus days. The Nurubar is, it depends a lot on our Battlecry minions, and even then it's just not really a good pick. Claw is just better to remove maybe a turn 1 coin, Knife Juggler or something like that, some 3/2 we can just get rid of the next turn. Gadget Sand for 6 mana now, Keeper the Grove, and Recycle. Here, Keeper is just too strong. It's a great 4 mana, deals 2 right away to the board, silences a Sludge Belch or something like that. It's just too good of a card to justify the nerfed Gadget Sand or Recycle. Undertaker again, the Mark of the Wild, and the Ogre Brute. Again, had we had Echoing Ooze, Mark of the Wild might be good. But here you look at the 3 mana 4/4 is extremely strong despite the downside, and in Arena a lot of times that downside isn't the worst thing in the world. Either you're looking at playing him on turn 3 and then he trades into either hitting the champion, or excuse me, hitting the hero in the face, or just going straight at whatever 1 minion that they have on the board, and that's not normally that bad at all. So we're going to go Ogre, and it's worth mentioning again that our 3-drop here is super low. I think we just have the 1. Yeah, just the Questing Adventurer, which is something you don't really want to play on 3 anyways. So the Ogre really fills that spot out really well. Ancient of Lore, Hunger Crab, and Clockwork Giant. The Crab, again, coming up. Not very good. Clockwork Giant is an interesting pick, but not particularly great in Arena. A lot of times you'll find people low on cards. And the Ancient of Lore, just that 5/5 body and allowing us to restore 2 more cards is extremely powerful. And in general, it's considered, this Ancient of Lore, along with the Ancient of War, are considered some of the best epics that you can choose in Arena. So we're definitely going with Lore here. Argent Squire, Healing Touch, and Wrath. While the Argent Squire is alright, we don't have anything to really buff it, and a 1/1 for 1, even with Divine Shield, isn't awesome. Especially if we went up against somebody who can clear that Divine Shield for either just the hero power or with minions for pretty much free. So we're going to look at Wrath because it's just so versatile. It can help us finish and trade up, or it can redraw us a card and finish. Silverhand Knight, Swipe, and Acolyte. All 3 of these pretty decent cards. Acolyte a little bit worse, being not in a mage where we could just ping it. Silverhand very strong, but Swipe is such a good board clear and one of the best, especially common cards for the Druid. Stormwind, Stoneskin, Gargoyle, and the Earthen Ring Farseer. Here, I want to go with the Earthen Ring just because we do have a lot of late game, and so what we can do is kind of trade down a little bit with some of those bigger guys and then maybe come in and heal it with the Earthen, or alternatively, because our 3-drop is a little bit limited, we can drop him on 3. So we'll just take a little break here at 23 and kind of look over our deck. We don't have, I mean, it's pretty interesting that we have 1 of every card. We haven't been offered 2 of any great cards yet. Our curve is curving out pretty well. We might want to see maybe a little more 3s and 4s in here, and maybe a couple more 2s coming in at the end of the game. So, but we're aware that our late game is very powerful. So far everything's looking pretty good. We just maybe want to fill out these 2 and 3 slots a little bit better. But on this pick, Wild Growth is obviously an interesting 2. It's not necessarily something you want to take right away. The Frostwolf Warlord, again, late game, that we already have 1 of, and the Ventrico, a great late game card that can come in and really make an impact. Understanding that our late game is already very powerful and that we might be getting some of these Frost Wolves and Boulder Fist and the Ancient, we don't know that we'll necessarily want much more, but at the same time, Wild Growth is a very risky card to take in Arena. It can really be kind of a dead card in your hand because it gives up some of that board control, but it's great on 2 because then it can basically make our next turn our turn 4, but we don't have enough turn 4 plays. We don't have Tazdingos or Yetis here to really fill out that 4 spot if we did get it right away in our starting hand. So a tough pick here, but I think Venture Co. Mercenary is too good to pass up, and that kind of just rounds out our late game. Tinkertown Technician, Starfire, and Senjin Shieldmaster. Here we look at, again, we've got the kind of mech deck going on, so that gives the Tinkertown a little bit of a bonus. Senjin, always good, and Starfire we've already got one of, but that's also a very good card. However, our late game's looking really good, and because a lot of our mechs that we have are 2-drops, I mean, you're looking at the Robocub, Explosive Sheep, Micro Machine, Ship's Cannon should be a mech, but isn't. And then even Jeeves. Those are pretty good early game cards that are going to come out as mechs and probably, well, hopefully survive one turn. And that'll give the Tinkertown really a lot of value there and one of the best cards in Arena if you can make it work. So we're going to take it because we think we'll be able to make it work enough times. Here again, we see the Druid of the Claw, a phenomenal card, the Worgen Infiltrator, and the Gnomish Inventor. All three of these cards very strong, very good in different situations. It is a little bit tough here. Our early game could maybe use the Worgen, but up against these two cards, they're so powerful that I think we're going to want to go Druid here, and then hopefully some discipline going forward, saying that our late game is done. So Wild Growth comes up again, and here we've made our late game even better, so it's stronger even in this turn. Starfire, again, our late game is too much already. And then the Haunted Creeper on 2. The Haunted Creeper here really allows us to get some more pressure on. I know we have a lot of 2-drops, but it is going to be a very strong one and a very sticky minion, which can oftentimes be very good for trading up. And keeping those 2 1/1 bodies on the board will really help us to trade some of our other 2 and 3-drops as those come out. So we're going to go Haunted Creeper just for the stickiness. Yikes. Well, had we known that this was what we would be offered, we probably would have taken the Wild Growth last turn, because we're going to take Haunted Creeper again. These other 1-drops just don't do enough. The Voodoo Doctor isn't necessarily terrible, but it's just not something you want to play on turn 1, and if you're picking a 1-mana minion on Arena, you typically want it to be something that you can play on turn 1 without feeling bad. Shield Bearer, Explosive Sheep, and Stormpike Commando. The 1-mana 0/4 is terrible. Explosive Sheep, again, we've been saying it all day, not really great. And then the Stormpike, it does have immediate board presence. It is a 5-drop, which really hurts our curve a little bit, but I think we have to take it here. It's just straight up better than these other 2. Last pick. So we get 2 very good cards here. Starfall and Keeper. Illuminator, not necessarily great. We don't have secrets in our deck ever, so really worthless on Druid. So what we need to look at is what do we want more of? Do we want that crazy good board clear? Keep in mind that synergizes a little bit with the Poison Seeds, or do we want the Keeper? Wow, so a lot of things to consider here. What great removal do we have, and then what really works? So we only have the 1 swipe, and swipe is typically a card you want as many as you can get of, and we don't have a lot of great removal cards right now for AoE especially. Poison Seeds kind of works. Starfire and Wrath, of course, being single target. And then we also have that Claw, or the Bite. Well, we do have Claw as well, and Bite. But those are all single targets, so we kind of lack the AoE. Starfall being so versatile allows us to establish that board control as we transition into our late game, so we maybe look at a Coin Starfall for 5, and then turn 6 follow up with the Boulder Fist Ogre, or even follow up with, you know, the Frostwolf Warlord, or if we have mechs out, the Junkbot. Unfortunately, Junkbot didn't turn out to be phenomenal. We didn't get as many mechs as maybe we had thought we'd be able to. But regardless, it still should be able to power up at least once during the run. So what we're going to do here... Oh, this is a tough one. The Keeper is great and has such good board presence. But I think we've got to go with Starfall. It synergizes just way better with the Poison Seeds if it gets into that late game where we need it. Man, this is tough. And so we'll go with Starfall. So this is our deck. It's pretty solid. Right around average, maybe a little bit above average. We got some good cards, some that aren't so great, so just going over the cards one by one here a little bit. We see Claw, great removal, really good for the early game. Sometimes it's good for trading up. Zombie Chow, always great if you can play it right on one. It trades so well with 2-drops. So, you throw it down on one, they play a 3/2, you trade for it. The downside has no effect, and it hurt their deck a little bit. Wrath, always a great card, really good for removal and redraw. The Robocub will be really great for just a standard 2-drop, dropping it right away on turn 2. Explosive Sheep, a little bit situational. And now that I think about it, it kind of makes Starfall a little bit worse, because we can use this as kind of a Starfall. 2 Haunted Creepers, not terrible, but very sticky minions. The Micro Machine, which has the chance to go completely out of control. If we, for example, had a 2/3 Robocub and then we play the Micro Machine behind it, it has a chance to really power up, maybe even to be a 5/2 before it gets removed. Ship's Cannon, I don't think we have any pirates in this deck that I saw, so it's just a 2/3 for 2. That's something you're playing on turn 2. Earthen Ring, very strong. So Ship's Cannon is probably one of the weaker cards so far of the ones we've gone over. Earthen Ring can be very strong, whether it's healing us up or healing a minion to maintain that board control. Ogre Brute, very strong. Questing Adventure, not necessarily strong. It really depends on what we get of our early cards when we play it. Tinkertown Technician is going to be kind of make or break. If we can play it on turn 3 right after the Robocub or after the Micro Machine and actually get that value, it's really going to turn games around and maybe even win us games outright. Bite, pretty good removal. Single target helps the board control stay in our favor. Poison Seeds, maybe the worst card in this deck. Not real great. Just overall, it's kind of a situational card that doesn't really have a situation. Swipe, one of the best cards in the deck. So following up Poison Seeds, of course, a great AoE clear and allows you to make effective trades. Jeeves, we'll see how he plays out. We have a lot of high drops, so he might be a little bit less effective, but a mech nonetheless. Keeper of the Grove, another really great card. Starfall will be really strong for either a 5-mana Consecration or helping us deal with a big guy. Antique Healbot, not necessarily awesome, but assuming we start to get beaten down by decks that have a lot of early game, Antique Healbot is kind of something that will pull us back in, and also a mech, so that may come into play. The 2 Druids of the Claw, very good cards, both really awesome. Frostwolf Warlord should be pretty effective. If we can keep some of our early minions around, we can at least make him a 5/5, maybe a 6/6. Junkbot should hit his card text and get buffed at least once whenever we draw him at a good time. And I actually think that I stand by this pick from earlier just because of how many mechs we had at the time. I do wish we had been able to get a few more in the stretch, but I think still there was enough to justify it, even if that was one of the later cards. 2 Stormpike Commandos, they really are just a something that has to be dealt with, a 2-health minion that has to be dealt with, but it does have an immediate board presence. Not necessarily awesome, but not bad either. Venture Co, very strong, 5 mana. The downside just doesn't matter because if they don't take care of it, you're doing 7 damage to whatever you want. And another thing worth noting, that there's interesting ways to play around Venture Co mercenaries. Something like even a Shield Bearer or a Unstable Ghoul kind of plays around it, because if Venture Co is your only minion, it stuns you a turn. But we have so many things like Swipe, like Keeper, even Starfire or Wrath, that we can get around those kind of low-cost taunts that will hinder a Venture Co and make it count for more damage than just one turn. Starfire, good removal, a good card draw. We got offered several. I'm happy we only took one just because of how strong our late game already is, and that 5 spot was so full. It was worth it to take more early game cards. The Ogre, one of the best common cards in the game, especially for big guys. Just a 6-mana 6/7 is super strong. And then the Ancient of Lore, another one of the really great cards in this deck. Probably one of the best, rival Swipe, and it'll help us stay fueled towards the end of the game. So all in all, a pretty good draft, and hopefully we've all learned a thing or two, and we're going to see how this goes.